Hello, welcome to Eye to Eye. I'm Ramin Tadayoni from Paris University, and I have the pleasure of having my friend and very renewed colleague, Kourous Rezaei from Chicago with us, and we're going to talk about innovation and in therapeutics in vitreoretinal area, more retinal probably than vitreous. Welcome.
Thank you, Ramin. Thanks for having me.
So intravitreal treatment have really revolutionized the way we treat patients. So now we can save their vision, but there's some burden. We have to inject very often. And there's new ways, probably we can a little bit decrease the burden. So what's your thought about that? How do you see the future? What's promising for you from all these different ways?
Yeah, I think the biggest disconnect is the data we have from clinical trials when you compare that to the real world situation where the number of letters patient gain is not as good as shown in the trials. And the main reason is that it's very difficult to have patients come on a monthly basis to get injections. I'm sure it's the same in France as in the US because they are elderly patients, somebody bringing them. And I think human nature is not designed to get intravitreal injections. So naturally, they do not want to get intravitreal injections. I think the key, there are I guess at least there are three ways of prolonging the disease or prolonging the number of injections. One is either to have a sustained release implant that you put in the eye, like Genentech Roche is currently doing the port delivery system that decreases at least the intervals of injections. One other way is that you have some kind of a sustained release, that you inject the medication, but it just lasts longer, or just the medication itself lasts longer. And third option is maybe you have a different medication in addition to anti-VEGF that fixes the disease in a way that decreases the burden and number of injections. And last, I think gene therapy appears to be promising, where you actually have a factory of cells producing anti-VEGF in a continuous manner over a longer period of time. That becomes a one-time treatment and patient independent.
So the one you see coming in, let's say, the two next years are?
I think the three actually coming in. One is, well, the most immediate one is the one probably from Novartis, the brolucizumab, that actually prolongs the duration. But I'm not talking about 3 to 4 months, but you're looking at maybe every 6 months, once a year, long term. I think would be the port delivery system from Roche Genentech, if it works, or maybe the gene therapy from either REGENXBIO, which is a subretinal injection, or the Adverum, which is intravitreal.
And what's your thought about the port delivery? There is a little bit difference here because the patients will need a surgery to have the device in the eye. So do you think that did change a little bit the indications? For example, could it be for everyone? How do you see the place that this new way of treating patients will have?
Well, I think one of the biggest complaints retina surgeons have is the transition of the field becoming a medical retina, and now by having this port delivery system becomes, again, a surgical procedure. But you're absolutely right. Again, we are talking with elderly patients, and not every elderly would be able to get surgeries, but it's amazing, and I'm sure it's very similar in France, that you have many patients who come with the age of 80, 90, and even above with very limited past medical history. So these are probably going to be short procedures, but it all depends on the safety profile of the device. If it's well tolerated and it's truly every 6 months or even longer, I think would be something attractive. Probably would not be the first choice to the patient. You again treat them with the regular anti-VEGF injections and see how they do. And for those that need continuous treatment, it becomes an option to them if they want to undergo a procedure.
You talked about gene therapy. So one of the questions that had been discussed is that when you put the gene, it's going to produce probably the anti-VEGF for long life. Mm-hmm. But maybe patient don't need for such a long term, so we'll never be able to stop it. Is it something that concern you or not, compared to other systems? If you decide when you begin the treatment and when you stop the treatment.
Mm-hmm. And I think, that's a very good question. I think that's the very beginning. I think that's the first step. Long term, you may have options. But my understanding is that you put those, especially if it's a subretinal delivery, it's a localized area that you transfect. And my feeling is, and I don't know whether this is correct or not, but my assumption is that area because it's not in the macular area, you put it somewhere peripheral, an area that is transfected, you may go back and you laser that area, and that area stops producing the anti-VEGF. That would be the option of
So that we will have more options for wet AMD, for neovascular AMD. We would have been very happy to have a few of them for dry AMD. And there was some trial, and everyone knows that unfortunately many of them were not promising, and there was some sadness coming to our patients and ourselves. So what's the difficulties in dry AMD, and how do you see to overcome these difficulties? Are you optimistic about the fact that in mid-term or near-term we will be able to treat these patients too?
No, I think, actually, I think the interesting thing, if I had to guess what's going to happen long-term, is I think we're going to be treating less injections for wet AMD, and we're going to be doing more injections for dry AMD. And I think the most promising treatment currently out there is the complement C3 inhibitor from Apellis that they're in a phase 3 trial. And if they be able to replicate that data, then you already have a treatment that slows down the progression. There's also a C5 inhibitor currently in a phase 2b, which I think would be probably we have to see how the results turn out. And also there's a other mechanism of action, which is the HTRA1 inhibitors that is also being evaluated. So again, there are multiple targets that people are looking into. And the difference, I think, becomes that the complement or HTRA1 may be actually playing a role as an etiology of the disease rather than as a symptom, as it is in wet AMD, that you have leakage. You know, we are not really treating wet AMD. Mm-hmm. We are treating only the symptoms of the wet AMD. Versus if you look at geographic atrophy, if you have an impact on complement or, for example, HTRA1, you're actually may having an impact on the disease. But again, you do not going to have an OCT to do any measurements, so that become a lifelong injections. But again, very similar to wet AMD, I think then they're going to be later on approaches coming that decrease the burden.
So patient could still keep hope that something will...
Oh, I think the macular degeneration is the leading cause of blindness in elderly, is a very large market size, and that's where most pharmaceutical companies are working on. So I think we would definitely have additional options for patients.
So you mentioned OCTs, so imaging, and then comes the artificial intelligence data and all these things that may help the ophthalmologist. What's your thought about that? How it will be useful in these retinal diseases that we are talking? Is it going to change something in our way of managing these patients or not?
I think for sure. I think one of the key tools we use in retina specifically is imaging, and all the imaging is digital. Now, one of the biggest disconnects we still have is the correlation between function and vision. We don't really know how function correlates to vision, but I think that is something probably AI would be able to help and manage to see whether there are two ways of looking at AI, I think. One way is just to tell AI, this is how we do it. You do it with the machine and look and tell me when there's fluid. On the other hand, is you just give the AI the data and let them figure it out, or the machine figure out what to look for. And I'm sure they're going to be looking at other things that we as physicians not actually paying attention. You know, when you look at OCT, I think the majority of physicians, retina specialists, pay attention to fluid. Nobody really sits there and looking at photoreceptors, the Mueller cell layer, all the other areas of the retina. And I think that is something that a machine can do, correlate that to vision, and see whether we should be looking at different parameters. So I think because it is a digitized imaging, I think has a huge impact.
I see. That's very interesting point of view, that actually AI would help it's also a research tool for us to better understand other signs, or maybe signs that we cannot catch with our eyes that the AI could catch, and becomes new parameters that will be useful to treat patients.
I mean, they already have. I think the AI looks in the back of the eye and just by looking at the vessels can tell you it's a male, female. I mean, when I look, if I was looking only at the image, I wouldn't be able to tell, but the AI can. So there are parameters that they can manage that we wouldn't know.
So that's an optimistic point of view, and I share it. It's that AI is going to help the doctor. It's not a replacement for the doctor, but it's going to be a tool, an extra tool that we will have to do better.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. I think you point out a great point, that I don't think we should be worried about AI taking over, because at the end of the day, practicing medicine is art. I don't think it's only science. You know, it has a lot of judgment in what you see. I'm sure you see patients, for example, have fluid, you treat. You have patients have fluid, you don't treat, just because of the feel how the patient had responded.
Yeah.
So you look at the entire picture and make a decision. So that, I think, the physician is still going to play, at least for the near future, a critical tool, but it will be assisting physicians to make better decisions.
We made an internal survey to see how things works, and we noticed that we make small study that when the patient's in front of doctors and when the patient is not in front, the interpretation of image will vary in some cases because of what you say.
That's a great point. That's a very exact point that it makes. At the end, you make a decision with the patient, with the data you have, and you look at everything and make
it's not just
judgment.
image.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Chris, I want to go back to the gene therapy because this is really something, it's game changer in our area. I want you to tell us more about this gene therapy. How do you see, because it's not only on the field of wet AMD, it's many things coming. In rare diseases, in other diseases, how do you see the changes that we will have due to this, thanks to this, in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that gene therapy will be the future of our field. I think, and the reason being is there are over or around 250 disease genes, retinal genes, and you have only one treatment out there. So you have a lot more things that you can treat. And now you have found a way to genotype, you have found a way to treat. And I always give this example, if you wake up with $100 million in the morning and you say you want to do gene therapy, where do you start? I think the ideal organ would be the eye.
Yeah, sure.
Because you have localized gene, you're not pumping billions systemically, you're putting in a very localized area. You have access directly to the cells you want to deliver it to, and you have a relative immune privilege that gives you some immunity to, it's not complete, but some immunity to rejection of the vectors. So that alone is a major advantage. And I think you can see that there are many trials currently ongoing in a phase 1/2A, and I'm actually glad that URetin actually, I think, paid a lot of attention to gene therapy. You have a gene therapist, and I want to congratulate you on that because I think it's a forward thinking. But I think over time now, in a few years, many of these trials, as you know, in orphan, you go from 1/2A to phase 3. You don't do anything in the middle. So then in a few years, many of these treatments would be in a phase 3, and some of them may actually be approved. And LCA, the RP65 was a very small orphan, but that was the very beginning. But now you have larger orphans that I think can help impacting the field of retina from retinal degenerative diseases. But in addition to that, also large indications, as you know, for subretinal injections, intravitreal injections, and so forth. I mean, anytime you find out what the pathologic mechanism is, if you can pinpoint it down to a single protein, you may be able to offer some kind of a gene therapy down the road.
Before finishing, I would also know your thought about another aspect of gene therapy, because in medicine you can't really separate the efficacy of a drug from its availability and practicality in the real life. So today's gene therapy looks like something handmade, expensive. Do you envision that it could become something more available, that we will find to make it available to everyone? So in Europe we are happy, full coverage, nobody is going to know the price, but still the society is paying for that. In other places people have to pay. And some of them, very few people in the world will be able to pay out of their pocket. So do you think this is due to the gene therapy is going to be like this forever, or we can imagine that, especially if you go to more frequent diseases, that somehow it becomes less expensive and more available or more easy to use?
Yeah, I think for sure cost is an issue, and I cannot really predict, but I like to compare it to computers. When the first PCs come out, they were very expensive, and then over time, when the technology advances, things became cheaper. And I think gene therapy is still at its infancy. You have only one drug approved, and most of the cost and difficulty with gene therapy is in the manufacturing. When you have that, and I'm sure that can get figured out over time when people become more experienced, and you have there are much more investment now in having more manufacturing facilities, and that automatically leads to a decrease in price, hopefully, when there is a lot of supply, and the technology hopefully will get better. so that you do not need. Obviously, one of the things that is very difficult to decrease the cost is the cost of a clinical trial. This is just very expensive. But I think from the cost of manufacturing of gene therapy, I think that hopefully with time becomes cheaper. And I think one additional way we need to think about is potentially a gene therapy is a cure. And our payment system is not designed for a cure. We are designed for something that you pay every month for 20 years. But now you have, so I think that is also the model after which you pay needs to change. And I think it will change and it will evolve. And technology always wins. You come with a new technology, other things, people will figure it out.
Excellent. I'm even more optimistic after listening to you. So many things happening in our field, and we are really lucky actually to be in a time that so many things happen, and we can say to patients that new things are coming, they will have a better life later on. Thank you, Kourous, for your thoughts. Very good insight in the fields, and thank you for joining us. For more information of these and related topics, please visit us at uretina.org.
Thank you for having me, Ramin. Thank you.
Thank you.